Hello folks, some work today on the Mercedes, the 1999 ML320. It's time to replace the front brakes and rotors on this. I think I had done a previous video on doing the rears a while back, but now it's time to do the front ones. I had changed these out, I'm going to say maybe 3 years ago. I think I had the vehicle about a year when I did them. But they're getting to the point that they're wearing down pretty good. I can hear it now when I'm braking that it's time to do it. So we're going to do that today, and you can go along for the ride. If I remember correctly, the last time I did it, it wasn't too difficult. The stuff was easy to get at, and the pieces came apart, went back together relatively easily. Of course, now this will make me a liar when I do it this time, but it wasn't too bad to work on. And the good news is, with an older Mercedes like this, I didn't have to go to Mercedes-Benz parts. I didn't have to go to a dealer. I didn't have to take it into the shop and have them do it. I can do it myself. In fact, right over here you can see I just went to Advanced Auto and got the glare there from the sun. The gold level pads, and the rotors are just a standard rotor too. So it's not hugely expensive, almost about the same as I pay for doing my minivan, the Honda minivan. So it's not a huge deal to get these parts or to put them on. We'll take you along through that repair in case this is something you've never done. I've done my share of brake pads and rotor changes, brake jobs on a number of vehicles over the years now, so I'm not a mechanic, but it's not like my first time trying it. So hopefully everything will turn out all right, but you can watch along with us. Now, let me just say, the first thing that you always do when you're going to do a brake job, aside from making sure that the vehicle is still and can't go anywhere, I will chock the rear wheel so it can't, because I'm just going to raise one wheel up at a time with my jack. But what you also need to do is to come over here to the master cylinder where you put your brake fluid in, and you need to open this, because as you're going to be pushing on the caliper, I'm just going to let that hang like that. I think as long as it's not tight, it'll be all right. As you're pushing on the caliper, you're going to push brake fluid back through, so you don't want pressure to build up. You want the calipers to move easy for you when you're pushing them back in, the piston and the caliper I'm talking about. So you remove the pressure from the system here by taking the cap, loosening the cap, taking the cap off of the master cylinder. That's also something you have to remember when you're done with doing your brakes, to make sure that that's secured again, because again, it's not something you think of because you're working at the wheels, you're not working in the engine compartment, but it has to be done both ways in order to make sure that you can do the job easy. So just that's a preliminary step, in addition to making sure that the vehicle is stationary and can't go anywhere while you're doing it. So don't forget to do that. Lift your hood, loosen your cap, take your cap off your master cylinder, and then you can begin to work. All right, I'll come back to you. Okay, we've removed the first wheel. This is on the right hand side, of course, that we're working on. Just to remind you, I have a Cobalt electric impact wrench that works very well, and a breaker bar to break the seal on them. Now remember, with the Mercedes, we don't have lug nuts, we have lugs. They fit in right into the rotors there, and then onto the hub. So it's just a different design. If you've worked on Mercedes, you know this, and this isn't the only kind of car that does it, but just a reminder, you got the lug bolts rather than the lug nuts. Now, what I'm seeing when I pull this is there is some scoring on the rotor. You can see here a bit. It's worn a bit uneven, and you can see there isn't much pad left on there. So what I'm going to have to do is, well, what I'm going to do, take the caliper off here so I can pull the pads out and change them. Then I've got to remove the old rotor put a new rotor on. As you can see, it's pretty rusted. I'm going to have to spray where it fits over the hub here with some WD-40, and it may involve using a hammer to tap from the backside to get it loose, to get it off. Also, it's got this nut that holds it in place here. It looks like it. I think it's a 30 torque, so I'll get back to you on that once I start doing it. It's been a while. So I just have to get that out also so that it'll come off, and then once I get the assembly off, then I can start to put everything back together, and we'll walk you through that. I also, while I'm underneath here with the wheel off, I'm just looking around to see if there's anything obvious, any problems with brake lines, suspension. Remember, this is an all-wheel drive, so you have drive shaft up here and you know, other suspension components here with it. I also am going to check briefly my horn. I've done a couple videos about replacing these horns with cheap ones. I just want to make sure that's still working while I have this off, and we'll take a look at that. So I'll come back to you once we get the caliper off here and the pads pulled, and then also the rotor. So that's my next move to do those things. Okay. All right, we have the caliper taken off, the old pads pulled out. I have that flipped upside down there, just sitting on top. I also removed the retaining screw on the rotor from the hub, the old rotor, and also the little bracket that goes on the side here to hold the rotor tight in place. So let me walk you through these just so that in case you're thinking of doing this, so you have an idea as far as sizes of sockets and nuts and bolts and things like that, so that you can do that. This screw here was a 30 Torx, came out fairly easily. It's just a short one. Let's see if I can have everything down here in my tray. Maybe I can just pull it up quick for you. Okay, it's just a short little screw that goes in there to hold that in place. The bracket here on the side, sorry, here I'm juggling the camera around, I don't have it on a tripod, so that goes just like this. You saw it in place before. These are 13 millimeter bolts. They came out fairly easily, just two of them. I'll set this aside, we'll use that again. The caliper bolts that hold the caliper to the frame here, you can see where they go in that way. They're going in from here. They slide in the back of the top of the caliper, the piston assembly here. These are Torx 40s. So I don't know if that's in focus or not. So what you'll need to do this essentially is, I'll walk you through the list just in case you're wanting to do this. If you got a chance, you want to write this down. The lugs are 17 millimeter. The little screw here was 30 Torx. These two pins that go into the top of the caliper, they're 40 Torx. And these two bolts that hold the bracket here, the retaining bracket here that holds the rotor in place, those are 13 millimeter. And this did come off fairly loose. I didn't need to bang on it. As soon as I loosened the screw up there, it came off, so that made it easier. Now let me show you the shape that the pads were in. This is the inside pad here. You can see there isn't much left on it. You can see the clips on this, how that slides right into this is the piston here, that when you step on your brakes it pushes, and that squeezes your pads. Caliper squeezes your pads against your rotor. That's what gives you your braking ability. This is the outside one. You can see the retaining clips on there where it fits in these two holes of the rotor, or the, excuse me, the caliper assembly. And you can see there isn't much left on these pads either. So it was time to do the change. There's no problem there. I don't like when it gets down to here metal on metal grinding too much. That's But now my next move is the piston here is extended partially, usually all the time, or you know, when it's not breaking, it doesn't extend back into the housing all the way. But in order to get the new pads in and get the clips in, get them and clip them over the new rotor, what I have to do is I have to push this piston back. Now there is a specialty tool for that. I just have a cheapie. It's called a piston pusher. Basically what you do is you clip it on like that, and then you just keep turning this in until the head of this thing pushes the piston all the way in. Now I cheat a little bit because I have a smaller one. I'll just take a socket, a larger socket that I'm not using, and I'll just stick that right in there in the piston. And then that way, when I go to put the pusher on, I don't need to turn it as far. I'm actually extending the length of, if you want to call it, the ram to do that. So all I need to do is keep turning this until I push the piston all the way in. Maybe I can do that real quick while we're on film here. I should have got it set up a little better, but I think we can do it. That way you can see what it looks like when the piston is all the way retracted instead of extended. Maybe this won't let me do it. No, it's not going to let me do it because I need to hold the caliper with one hand and turn with the other. So let me come right back to you. I'll show you what the piston looks like when it's all the way in, and then I'll show you how the new pads go on. So just hang in there. But like I said, this piston has to go, the front face of this piston goes all the way back. The rubber boot here goes back even with the housing, so that you have enough room to comfortably put the new pads in and have them fit over top of the new rotor easily. So that's going to be our next move. So I'll be right back. Alright, so as you can see, first of all here, the piston is pushed all the way back in with a pusher. It's a little hard to do. I need to get a better quality one of those kind of piston pushers. The more heavy duty ones, the shank coming out doesn't have a thumb screw, you know, a turn handle like that. What it has is a bolt head on it, and what you do is you just get a socket and a ratchet and you can turn it that way. It's a lot easier on the hands, especially if this piston wants to go hard for you, and this one certainly did, but I did get it back in. Also, I put the new rotor on and put the nut back in, the Torx 30, excuse me, Torx 30, and then also the little bracket here with the 13mm bolts. Now one thing that I do that they recommend that you do with a new rotor like this, when they come from the factory, they're usually bound in plastic and have a lightweight oil that they coat them with just to keep them nice looking and to avoid any kind of premature rust or if any moisture got on them and so on. But obviously on this surface here, where the pads have to squeeze against this rotor to slow your car down, you don't want the surface to be slippery in any way. You want it to adhere. When the pads squeeze against it, you want there to be friction. That's what helps you to stop. So the way that you deal with that is I just use some carb cleaner. You just spray it on and wipe it off, and it takes the oily film right off of there, and it makes it just kind of a smooth surface for the pads to squeeze against. So my next move now, of course, is to put my pads into the caliper here. I don't know if I can do this one-handed. Maybe not. Let me just see if I can slide that. Remember, these teeth go into the piston, and make sure that your angle here, the way that it bevels matches the direction you're going with your rotor. And it's not gonna, no, it's not gonna let me do it one-handed. I'm sorry. I'll have to come back to you when the both calipers are back on. I'm putting it back together. So, but you just squeeze that in there till it clicks in place, and then you put the outer one on and snap these brackets over the holes here. Again, it'll go like this because this is up. Remember, this is still upside down. When I flip it over, it'll be where we want it to be. So I'll come back to you when that stage is done then. Okay, we are all back together again. As you can see, we've got the new pads are in place. The ears on the pads, as you can see here and here, fit on the top of this rail and this rail here on the bottom of the assembly. So they're good and tight in place. The piston is fully extended yet so that I could slide the pads over top of the new rotor, and I put the retaining pins back into the caliper assembly, the T40 headed ones. What I did was I put a little bit of anti-seize on them so that they'll slide through the slides. They do slide in and out a little bit with the when the caliper is pinching and releasing. So you want that to be lubricated. You do not want anything lubricated on the face of the pads or on the face of the rotor. Those you definitely don't want any lubrication on. But these pins in the back, that's okay as long as you're a little careful with it that you don't get it on places you don't want it to be. So this one is now done. I have to go do the other side. And then the front brake job will be done. But the procedure for the other side is going to be identical to this one, except you're working on the left-hand side rather than the right-hand side. Just make sure when you're unpacking your pads, they come in a 4-pack. Make sure you keep your left and right separate because there is a difference between, at least the outside ones, between left and right. So it's stamped on the plate right here on this one. It says RH or right hand, and then the other one says LH for left hand. So it was easy to see that. And also what I always try to do when I pull my old ones off is I lay them the way they were in place. That way, in case I get confused about what goes where or what's supposed to fit where, I can just look down and say, oh yeah, that's the way it was assembled. So that's not a bad idea. Or if you're somebody who just wants to pull out your camera phone and take a quick snapshot before you start it just to see what it should look like when you put it back together, you can do that too. So I won't bother to show you me doing the other side just because it's the same thing as I'm doing here. Unless I run into something unusual or different, I won't do that. So this brake job you can assume will be complete because obviously I'm not going to drive with one good brake and one worn brake. That would not be smart. You always replace them in a tandem like that. So, but I thank you for watching. If you have any questions or suggestions for me, I'm not a mechanic, just a homeowner who's trying to save money, living out here in the country on a shoestring, you know. So please give me some ideas if there's something that you think would make this easier or better. But otherwise, I hope this was instructional for you to help you change your brakes out in your vehicle. Even if it isn't quite this same kind as I have, it's a fairly similar procedure. Might be some slight differences in design of the calipers or the pads or what have you, but it's essentially the same type of system with any kind of disc brakes. So maybe this will help you with changing your own out. So please subscribe if you haven't, hit the notifications bell, and we'll come back to you with another car repair. Thanks for watching.